Today I'm going to talk about using learning centers to engage students. How many times have you looked at your class and observed students not on task, yawning, scribbling in their notebook, or thinking about what's for lunch? Many studies have shown that students learn best when they are engaged. Implementing learning centers can be an exciting addition to a classroom. They make it possible to offer a variety of activities that can be completed by students in groups or individually. Benjamin Franklin said, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn." Involving students in the learning process will result in greater retention of material. If you went back to your class tomorrow and took a survey about how they like to learn, the majority would say they like to learn in groups. The benefits of working in groups are they inspire collaboration, social interaction, responsibility, and risk-taking. My personal reason for using learning centers is easy. It allows me to get to know my students better, identify strengths and weaknesses, and learn their interests. Although they are a lot of work, they are worth it in the end. When I sat down to plan my first center, I wanted to include the following components: differentiated learning, flexible grouping, defining workspace, designing the actual learning center, including types of learning centers that would interest the students and connect content across the curriculum. Differentiating instruction is important because it recognizes that every student that enters your classroom enters with varying backgrounds, knowledge, readiness, and preference in learning and interest. When creating centers, make sure you include different levels of instruction. It's important to remember students should be able to complete a center independently and with success. Flexible grouping allows students to interact with other students in a meaningful way while working towards their learning goals. There are many benefits to flexible grouping. The most obvious one, that they are flexible. My favorite one is that they are ever changing. Students and parents can never figure out why they are grouped the way they are because I change them from week to week. Another reason that I love flexible grouping is that they allow a student to reinforce, maintain, or expand on a specific skill or content. Flexible grouping can be fun. On this page, I've included a few of my favorite ways to choose groups. I use popsicle sticks, Uno cards, puzzle pieces, content cards, just to name a few. Designing a workplace can be a challenge. Learning centers should include a clearly identifiable workspace that encourages movement and easy transitions. I like to use students' desks because they're manageable and in the classroom already. Those centers, I use baskets to arrange their materials, any supplies that they need, and I place them in the center of the table. And students move easily from table to table. I also include designated areas for a writing center, a science table, listening center, and a computer station. Designing centers is the toughest because it is the most time consuming. What I suggest for you is to include all members of your grade level team. Each member takes a week and plans out the centers, and then you rotate them from week to week. This way, you could end up with a whole month of centers ready to use. The other thing I would recommend is using Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers. They all have centers already completed for you to use. Another tip, I always run centers after whole group instruction. During that time, I work on a skill, and during that time, I can assess students' understanding. On Mondays, I always take the time to explain and model each center. On Fridays, I ask for feedback, what they liked and what they didn't like, and I always jot it down somewhere that I can find it for next year. My final tip, take a picture of each center. So next year, setup will be easier. There are many ways to manage learning centers. The only rule is to make sure your students understand it so that they know where to go. What I say is it has to make sense for you and for your students. And the first one, a teacher used a smartboard. She took pictures of the students and then she clicks and drags them to their center. The third one uses colored clothespins. The children all have their names on it, and based on that color, that's where they need to go. Types of learning centers. This is important. Learning centers should encourage students to make connections in other content areas and apply them to real situations. Don't forget, take the time and include yourself in a center. The next few slides are examples of learning centers on the elementary level. I chose the elementary level because they need to include centers that are across the curriculum. Most centers I create are based on themes. I chose Thanksgiving with the hope you could adapt them to your classroom. Guided reading is probably the most important one because it allows students to practice and apply their skills in a small group setting with you guided them. Magnetic letters are a cheap way to create a center. You use baking pans and magnetic letters. Listening centers are great for students to use to listen to the written word. Make sure you include varied levels of text and the activity sheets that they use to respond to the text, that students have the ability to choose their own paper so that they have success. Literacy centers. Literacy centers, I include iPads, I include newspapers, magnifying glasses, word blocks, anything that they can use to make connections between letters and the written word. Art centers are fun for students to use. They like them. A lot of times what I do is, especially where you see in the bottom the turkey, I ask the parents to send in materials that the students use. That way the student is making the project and not the parent. Science centers, I usually assign a para, or we use star helpers in our school where there's 6th, 7th, 8th grade students that come down during our center time and they help the younger children. It's just a little bit easier to help manage the science experiments. Writing center is probably the most fun for teachers because they can be the most creative. You can choose stationery, you can choose different markers, crayons, you can have journal time during that area. Dictionaries are important to include. Anything that encourages the student to write. Computer centers, students all love to use the computer. Their eagerness to manipulate the computer is awesome. What I would encourage is using headphones. Headphones allow less interruptions in the class. Math center, journals are important to include, especially with problem solving when we're asking students over and over again to show different ways to come up with an answer. I like to use dice. There are so many dice games online for you to use. Math centers promote practice and review, problem solving, hands-on, manipulatives, and facts. The benefits of learning centers include grouping, small group instruction, flexible instruction grouping, effective instruction, because you can differentiate, it's more focused and systematic, and you're ongoing assessing it. It also encourages high center engagement, greater opportunities to respond, and allows more chance for students to take a risk. And it's more meaningful. The integration of the other content areas allows students to apply their skills. The best teachers are those who show you where to look, but don't tell you what to see. Well, I hope you have found this presentation helpful, and always remember to engage your students in learning.